At Coldwater Creek, we believe your clothing should reflect the life you live. Effortless, inspired, and confident. With artful prints, rich seasonal colors, and quality fabrics chosen for comfort and ease, every style is designed to feel great and fit beautifully at every size. This season, find fresh looks and layers inspired by the beauty of nature. Coldwater Creek, artfully designed just for you. Shop now at coldwatercreek.com.
Crystal Rosa's here to tell you that you can stop dreading the gym. F45 Training's group workouts combine strength training, cardio, and functional movements. F45 is so different. It's a place where everyone's welcome no matter where you are in your fitness journey. You'll feel stronger and ready to crush your day. Most importantly, you'll love going to the gym. Right now, F45 is giving you the ultimate trial, 5 classes for just $49. Sign up now at f45nyc.com.
I think it's important to recognize that this is a scary time to be a journalist, right? And I think there's a feeling that, we collectively as civil society don't always have their back. At the same time, I do think that has led to a feeling of fear on the part of a lot of journalists and a desire to be as careful and as restrained as possible. In my view, a lot of that has been overreaction, right? When you have an autocrat in the White House, obviously you need to be really careful, right? You need to be, all good journalists are very careful about what they say all the time. It is extra true when you face that threat of retaliation. At the same time, as with any form of anticipatory obedience, right? Obeying in advance, when the media does it, it just gets worse.
I'm Kimberly Atkins Stohr, and this is Justice by Design, where we talk to the people doing the work, the hard work of making sure that justice happens, because it doesn't happen on its own, especially right now when our democracy is at stake. I just want to take a moment at the top to thank everyone for the well wishes. As you know, I was taken out by the flu for 2 solid weeks. I'm loath to miss an episode, but this really was bad. I had to go to urgent care twice. It is no joke. So please, please, please mask up, get your flu shot if you haven't. This year's strain is terrible, and especially given where the federal government is headed on public health, you really need to take it in your own hands right now, and please do that. But thank you again for all the well wishes. So during the time that I've been gone, and before that, and even now, the number one question that I have been asked by my listeners of this podcast, by people who see me on MSNBC or read my columns in the Boston Globe, has been, what do we do? What do we do as we watch the federal government being taken over by autocrats? What do we do in the midst of this constitutional crisis? What do we do to protect our democracy? These are big questions, and that is why today I'm so glad to be joined by Ben Raderstorf of Protect Democracy. Ben, thank you for joining me.
It is so great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So just take a moment to introduce yourself to our listeners. What do you do there at Protect Democracy?
Yeah, so it's really nice to be introduced to everybody listening and watching. So Ben Raderstorf, I'm a policy advocate with a group called Protect Democracy. We are an anti-authoritarian organization. Our mission is to prevent the United States from declining into a more authoritarian form of government. Full stop. That's what we do. We do what it says in the tin. My work at Protect Democracy, the biggest thing that I work on is I run our If You Can Keep It newsletter. I imagine this is perhaps a Boston-centric crowd may know the potentially apocryphal story when Ben Franklin left the Constitutional Convention. He was asked, what sort of government did you create? Monarchy, an empire, what is it? And he said, a republic, if you can keep it. We are in that moment right now. So the newsletter, this Substack publication that we write, it's designed to be an analysis and action platform. So what do you, regardless of who you are, right? If you are from a staffer in the Senate to a mom in the suburbs who wants to know what you can do to help, that's what this platform is there to do. And we try to keep people armed and informed so they are ready to participate in our democracy in this critical moment.
And it is a great newsletter. You really ought to subscribe. We will put the link in the show notes for this podcast episode so you can find it easily. And I have to say, Ben, one reason why I wanted you to join me was because I do appreciate what you write, particularly in last week's edition that was entitled How to Brace for Friday Night Massacres. And you're talking about the efforts to purge the government of anyone who is not a loyalist to Donald Trump. And that's horrifying. But I think that reading this, it goes so much broader than that. And it serves to help answer the question of what do we do? And it's not just about the action, which we will get to in a minute, but it's even just how we think about and frame what is going on, because it's a lot, right? It's overwhelming. That's by design. But that doesn't mean that you should tune out or feel overcome or feel like it's just too much to tackle. It's exactly not that. It is not this strategy that is being employed by the Trump administration is not one of strength. In my opinion, it's one that shows an awful lot of weakness. But sort of just to start off our conversation, what do you say to people who are feeling overwhelmed about how they should think about what they see in the news every day?
Yeah. So I'd say two things. So first, I hear you. I understand you. I feel the same. Anyone who cares about our democracy is feeling the same set of emotions right now. It is overwhelming. It is, frankly, we are in uncharted territories in so many different ways. We are living through one of the most pivotal times in American history, certainly in the last century. At the same time, the other thing I think we all need to know and hold is that sense of feeling overwhelmed, of feeling like it's all just too much, that is deliberate. That is what Donald Trump and the people around him want you to feel, right? It is a strategy. They are trying to construct an image that this is all fait accompli, right? That the things that they're doing, the takeover is already complete. That anybody who wants to present a different option for our democracy, wants to be in opposition in any meaningful way, they want us to feel like we might as well just go pack up and go home. And obviously that is not true, right? So to the degree that we can hold both of those things in our head, right? It is a very scary moment. And the sense of paralysis that may lead us to, it's how we lose.
Exactly. I mean, I think one thing, I mean, I'm a lawyer, so I've been focusing a lot on the legal challenges and what's going on. And one point of frustration for me has been people, when we see this flurry of litigation against the lawless and unconstitutional actions that are being carried out that lead to authoritarianism. People who will say, legal pundits who I deeply respect will say, so yes, you have these orders, but then what? Then when he ignores them, what do you do? Hold him in contempt. Well, Pam Bondi will tell the Marshal Service to ignore those orders. And it's not, it really treating it like a fait accompli. And first of all, no, the Constitution and the laws still mean something. They still mean something, and this is important. Secondly, for that to happen, for the Attorney General, if the president is relying on the Attorney General to give an illegal order to federal marshals to not do their jobs, we're at the point where at that point we should be talking about people getting impeached. We already probably should be. But the people have power. I keep asserting to people that this is a government of the people. The first three words in the Constitution are "we the people." So how do people not lose hope, not feel overwhelmed, and not feel like, oh, well, all of the levers that we can use are in the hands of people who support Trump?
Yeah. So I find it really helpful to the degree that you can to step back and think about the longer term, the bigger picture. What Trump and the MAGA faction are trying to do, they're trying to construct something that political scientists call a competitive autocracy, right? So Stephen Levitsky and Luke Way, Steve is in Cambridge. He's your neighbor, but he basically what they've studied is around the world, we've seen a wave of sort of semi-democracy regimes. So this is, Turkey or Hungary or El Salvador or Venezuela, where you have elected leaders who, instead of getting rid of democracy altogether, right, they keep some elements of competition. So they keep elections, they keep some amount of free press, they allow the opposition to operate to some degree, but they just tilt the playing field in their favor to the degree where things like elections aren't really that meaningful anymore. That's what they're trying to do, right? So that's what all of this builds up into, right? It is an attempt to entrench themselves in power so that future voters can't kick them out. Right. That is a very, very difficult process. So even when it comes to things like defying court orders or illegally shuttering agencies or trying to pack the federal government with their henchmen, like all those things work towards that end. Right. And that only works if we, the American people, let that work. Right. If we decide that we are going to allow the playing field of our democracy to be tilted to the degree where actually we're not going to be able to make an informed decision over who our future leaders are going to be. And then, I think for me, when you think about it in that larger term scale, right, that really what really matters is maintaining our ability to make democratic choices in the future. And there are so many steps between here and there, right, where they have to succeed and democracy has to fail. It's really scary, right? Each step gets darker. Each domino that falls makes the next one more likely to fall, but still reminding ourselves that this is the very beginning of a very long process can help. For me, it helps steel myself for what's coming, right? That we need to be prepared for the long haul here. And even the erosions that we're seeing, right? They are the beginning, not the end.
Yeah, I think that is so wise because not only is this something that is going to take time, it is multifaceted, right? I'm focusing a lot on the legal challenges, what the laws say, what the Constitution says, what rules are being broken. There's also the political aspect of it. We have, we have the Congress as a check on the executive, just like we have the judiciary as a check on the executive. We have outside groups and organizations like yours who are working to promote democracy on those fronts and more. We have citizens, including the federal members of the federal workforce themselves, who are pushing back on this. So it's not easy to comprehend in a quick, easy soundbite way, and it's very complicated. And it's going to take a long time, and that can make it feel, on the one hand, that can make it feel overwhelming. But if you understand that and you can hold tight knowing that there are people working really, really hard to protect our democracy, I think that makes it easier to feel engaged, easier to not get discouraged, and easier to believe that our democracy still withstands until it doesn't. Right.
Yeah. And there's no hard line, right, between democracy and not being a democracy anymore.
Right.
That's part of the problem, right? The gradual erosion makes it harder to see and stop. There's not, the final breach that we stand in front of. But it also means that that the fight is never lost, right?
Yeah.
That things can move forward and backwards, and they get harder and they get worse, but nothing is irreversible, right?
Yep.
And I really like. I think it was the Polish opposition in the 1980s. The opposition to Polish communism. Right when there was sort of big crackdowns, the saying that they would rely on was, the winter may be yours, but the spring will be ours. And remembering that, as much as this is a dark time that we are going through, right, we can together create a better, more vibrant, more representative and functional democracy on the other side of that. And I hold a lot of hope and faith that is still where in the long term this is going.
So I want to hit on some of the points you made, more tangible action items that people can do. And you said first, name it to tame it. What do you mean by that?
So a lot of what they're like I said earlier, a lot of what they're trying to do is to present things as overwhelming, right? As to to move so quickly that the rest of us are not able to keep up and then we all just sort of give up. When we can identify those patterns, those tactics that they're using, they're not complicated, right? The idea that they tend to fire, they tend to make particularly scandalous actions on Friday nights, right? They're firing January 6 prosecutors or the inspectors general, right? Like they do those on Friday nights because they want to feel like by Monday morning that we've all just sort of accepted it and moved on, right? If we can point to that, the fact that that's what they're doing, it helps rob that sort of surprise and shock and awe, right? And naming what's going on helps us recognize the ways in which, frankly, they're attempting to manipulate us and to manipulate our reactions. And then we can respond more rationally, more calmly, more directly.
Yeah. And you said, second, be loud about what you're going to do about it.
Yeah. Right.
Talk a little more about that.
This is something that, I think is something that, it's hard for all of us, right? Like I struggle to remind myself it's not enough to just say this is bad, right? What is the action item I'm going to take? And all of us can take action in ways big and small, right? For some of this, that may just be calling our elected representatives. And trust me, I know people say this and it feels empty and it feels worthless, especially if you don't politically agree with your representatives, but they are paying attention, right? There is nothing that members of Congress track more closely than how many phone calls did we get about that question, right? It's slow, it's frustrating, it's painful, but it works, right? So
yes, it does.
Level 1 might be calling your representatives. Level 2 might be, starting to, attend a protest locally or attend a meeting of a group that's there's growing grassroots groups that are organizing on the local level, right? Starting to organize yourself, right? Building connections with your local electeds or other people in your community who care about politics, about our democracy, about different issues, right? Just starting to show up, right? And every outrage say, this bad thing is happening. In response, I'm going to this meeting on Thursday. I hope other people will come with me, right? And finding some way to turn outrage into action, it can feel symbolic, right? And at first it is, right? It's breaking that seal of paralysis and saying, I'm going to find some way to do something. But the symbolism becomes meaningful over time, right? And as we all start to do the little things together, we can transform into really impactful, growing movements. And we are starting to see those green shoots of action, of movement and mobilization really starting to emerge. And I think it's just going to grow.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think this doesn't just work over time. It can have an immediate impact too. Listen, Donald Trump lives for the applause, to paraphrase Lady Gaga. He wants to have the biggest crowds, to be the most popular president, to be for everybody to love him. And if he is being roundly panned by the American public, that will brush him back. I don't underestimate the power of that. That's why you have seen him, by and large. One reason that I don't take a defeatist attitude toward whether it's contacting your members of your elected officials, contacting the White House, contacting whoever you need to let them know that you don't that these elected officials work for them, and people in the executive through the election of the president work for them. That is important. You are booing and hissing him, and he does not like that, and he tends to be brushed back from those actions. Certainly, if you look at the legal challenges from his first term, and even some of the legal the challenges about funding and stuff, the court, they have been listening to the courts, and they have been being pushed back, and they realize that these things are not landing well. So I think it's important your voice is so important. Don't underestimate that. But I want to, Ben, get to your third point, which is don't buy into irreversibility. You touched on that a little bit earlier, but say more.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a moment of darkness, of crisis on a lot of levels for our democracy. And we are going to see a lot of harm, right? There's going to be harm both to our institutions, but more importantly, to real people who are impacted by the things that are happening right now. It's terrible. It's tragic. It's painful. Very little of it is irreversible, right? Some of that can happen in the short term. We've seen legal strategies that are already already bearing fruit in terms of blunting some of the worst impacts and most illegal or unconstitutional actions. That part seems to be working. Some of it is going to be longer term, right? We're not going to see reversibility for 2 years or 4 years, but in 10 years, we absolutely can, right? And holding on to the conviction that everything that happens, we know that over time we can counter it and reverse it and make things better, not just worse. That's what we have to hold on to, because it's true, right? And the only reason that ceases to be true is if we all give up hope on that possibility.
Yeah. So one persistent problem right now is, how do we get our information? Where do we know? How do we know that it is information that we can trust? As a journalist, I am constantly frustrated about the inability of journalists to frame things accurately, give proper context, and really understand the things that they are writing about when it's literally their job to inform other people, and they seem so often themselves to be uninformed. I focus on how uninformed they are about the legal the legal challenges and what they mean and what each order that comes out means and what it doesn't mean, but even more broadly, the political implications, how it's actually harming the most vulnerable people, which is such a that part of the conversation is crucially absent in this. The way LGBTQ kids are being isolated and targeted and scapegoated, the way that migrants are being treated in a completely inhuman way. At least in the first administration, the separation of kids seemed to be the bridge that was too far, and that caught the media's attention. We are not seeing that same energy being paid to the cruelty. So where do people turn to get their information, and how can journalists be better?
Yeah. So I'll take those in different places, right?
Okay.
So the first half of that question, where can people get their information? The truth is the best way to do it is a diverse set of information sources, right? So any individual outlet, any individual reporter is struggling to cover this moment. But as a whole, right, we have never had better access to information about what is going on, right? You have to piece it together from mainstream outlets, there's a lot of really good startup publications like Status News or The Bulwark or Popular Information, right? Largely newsletter-based journalistic outlets that are doing incredible work, right? So find a diverse set of journalistic resources to subscribe to support, to encourage, to give your resources to, and don't stay within the information flows that you're mostly used to. The big caution I give everybody right now is we are living in a moment where social media's role as an information arbiter is fragile. And for those of us who've often relied on social media platforms to be our aggregators, especially Twitter, now X, we are seeing the dangers of that, and how this sort of political manipulation of a platform can really warp our reality. If you're not moving to Blue Sky, I highly recommend. It in terms of an algorithmic platform, it is much closer to neutrality than the Muskified Twitter.
Sure.
But in general, I think we're seeing the weakness of social media as a sole source of information. So it takes a lot more work to find good information, but it's out there. And certainly I hope people will subscribe to it if you can keep it. We see ourselves as one small part of a much larger effort to provide really rigorous analysis, reporting, information about this moment. And there's so many other people who are doing it.
There is a lot of good independent journalism happening right now. And before we get to the point about the media, I also want to caution people on social media. You got to take breaks from it. Yes. I have taken breaks from it too. And one trap that I am trying not to fall into is there is a tendency, even on Blue Sky, for the people who are all on the same side of the fight to start arguing with each other, arguing about semantics, arguing about approach and tactics and all. No, That is not what we need to be doing. We need to all be doing our parts. There is work for everyone to do. There is space for everyone. And the more unite, I'm not saying that people can't honestly disagree about things. Of course you can. But social media feeds on that. There are also a lot of bots on Blue Sky, frankly, that foment discord. And that's really annoying. I see them on my posts and other things just trying to start up an argument. So you have to be really careful with that. And yes, use it to consume information smartly, but don't let it devolve into something that is not helpful and actually harmful. Sorry, I didn't mean to keep butting into your answers. But talk a little bit about journalism more broadly.
For journalists, I actually have a lot of, frankly, I have a lot of sympathy for the challenge of being, especially a mainstream journalist in this moment. We are in an environment where there is an authoritarian presidency in the White House, and they have shown both historically and recently a willingness to use every tool at their disposal to try to censor and retaliate against unfavorable coverage. That is a reality, right? We have a post, I think last week on If You Can Keep It, that explores, the long history of the Trump administration using different tools to try to censor free expression through the press. The most recent example of that, folks may have seen, there's been an effort to retaliate against the Associated Press because they refused to call it the Gulf of America, right? Sort of naked violations of the First Amendment. So, the net effect is this is a scary and unprecedented environment to be a journalist in, right? And the feeling of risks and threats, from defamation lawsuits, frivolous defamation lawsuits to, even just, your own physical security. We've seen Elon Musk and others, try to single out and target individual reporters for their for the reporting, trying to send, online supporters, off to hound the journalists just for doing their job. So yes. I think it's important to recognize that this is a scary time to be a journalist, right? And I think there's a feeling that, we collectively as civil society don't always have their back. At the same time, I do think that has led to a feeling of fear on the part of a lot of journalists and a desire to be as careful and as restrained as possible. In my view, a lot of that has been overreaction, right? When you have an autocrat in the White House, obviously you need to be really careful, right? You need to be, all good journalists are very careful about what they say all the time. It is extra true when you face that threat of retaliation. At the same time, as with any form of anticipatory obedience, right? Obeying in advance, when the media does it, it just gets worse, right? If you start tempering your coverage because you're worried that the president is going to retaliate you or, Elon Musk is going to try to send his supporters online after you, that just encourages more of the same, right? And I do think even in just over the past week, we are seeing, a recognition from a lot of mainstream news outlets that, this is not something that can be, this environment is not something that can be sort of both sides or wishy-washed, right? That good journalism demands that this White House be covered aggressively and truthfully and honestly. And it takes time, right? It's a collective action problem. But I think we're starting to see reporters, feel a little more confident in covering things as they are, right? Even if that feels risky or vulnerable. And what all of us need to do is we need to not just criticize when it feels like outlets are not meeting that standard, but we need to be the first ones there to celebrate, to support them, to back them up, both when they cover things well and accurately and unflinchingly, and when they're targeted for retaliation, right? So, the AP feels like a really important test. And honestly, folks out there listening, now might not be a bad time to go out and just go, the AP is a nonprofit, right? Go donate $5 just to show them that, you're there with them and as they're being targeted right now. Same thing for other outlets, right? If this continues, right, I hope the White House Correspondents Association, the reason it exists is to protect against this sort of thing, right? We need collective action by the media to resist this, the censorship and retaliation efforts, because the truth is, right, it's a first they came for the Associated Press kind of thing. If we say nothing, we're all going to be next.
That's absolutely true. I do appreciate that you led with humanity there because it is a difficult time
It's a tough time.
to be a journalist in the face of an administration that is openly, oh gosh, I mean, who openly has been calling us the enemy of the people for
Right.
a decade,
Right.
and ramping up threats to subpoena, arrest, sue, uh, turn the courts on journalists,
Yes.
and also fomenting a lot of hatred toward members of the press, the only industry that has express protection in the Bill of Rights, that can put a lot of people in danger. So I
Yep.
do say that, and that is an important point. But again, we can hold two thoughts at the same time. We need to be supportive of journalists. I always say a lot to my listeners. So one of the best things you can do is to support your local news organization.
Yes.
Local news organizations in particular
Yep.
that are doing hard work against untold circumstances, who don't always have the ability, like, I do working at a major newspaper, to have lawyers and other people who can fight back against those sorts of attacks. They may not have that, supporting legal funds that protect journalists. There are a
Yep.
lot of things you can do. So yes, you can correct them when they don't get it right, but support them. You can do both
Yes.
things at the same time. Ben, we could talk about this for hours, but I highly encourage everyone to subscribe to the newsletter if you can keep it. And Ben, thank you so much for joining me on Justice by Design. I think this has been really, really useful. It's been useful for me, and I know it's been useful to the listeners too.
This was such a treat. I'm such a fan of the pod, so it was great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Ben leading with humanity in that moment reminded me of something that I was thinking about just this morning, that I think it's important for all of us to keep in mind. I have seen a lot of people criticize. Remember the comment that former First Lady Michelle Obama said, "When they go low, we go high," criticizing that as if that meant we lie down or we give up or we let those on the wrong side of justice win without a fight. I think you all got Michelle totally twisted on that. She is a Black woman who came from, as Elizabeth Warren likes to say, the jagged edge of the middle class on the south side of Chicago, faced untold barriers to become a legal professional working in one of the best law firms in the country, having her own political career with the city of Chicago, running major institutions and showing by example that even a president can marry up. She is a smart woman. She did not talk about lying down, but what she talked about is you don't give up your righteousness in your fight. You still fight like hell, to quote somebody, but you do so knowing that justice is on your side, and you don't do it with the meanness, with the cruelty, with the hate, with the belittling, with the dehumanization that you see the other side done. So when you're talking about leading with humanity, you can still fight like hell, but you fight for marginalized people who are being hurt worse, the most, by these authoritative actions by the federal executive branch. You talk about the importance of not demonizing immigrants. You talk about protecting children, protecting people of color, protecting women. You talk about protecting people who are not going to be able who are going to have to make hard decisions between groceries and paying their bills as inflation continues to skyrocket, because it's the billionaires who are benefiting and not the people who need the help most from their federal government, people who have paid their taxes, paid into Medicare, paid into Social Security, done all the things that they're supposed to do, followed the rules that Americans are expected to follow. And now they are getting trampled over by an administration that only cares about power and enriching themselves. That's the fight. That's going high. So keep that humanity, keep that righteousness front of mind as we fight, and do exactly like Michelle Obama said, go high, because they're going low, so low that they won't even let democracy stand in their way. Thank you so much for listening to Justice by Design. Don't forget to follow the podcast wherever you get your pods. And you can also check it out on YouTube at the Politicon channel if you want to watch our conversations going back. Oh, we've been doing this for months now. This has been great. I really appreciate all the positive feedback. You can always help by giving 5 stars wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you do it. Give it a 5-star rating because that helps other people find it too. I will be back next week. See you then on Justice by Design.